The shotgun barrel gleamed in the afternoon sun as Adelaide Edwards aimed it at the tall cowboy standing on her porch, and Owen Kincaid had just enough sense to freeze with his hat in his hands. "Madam, I am not here to cause you any trouble," he said slowly, keeping his voice calm and even. "I just wanted to introduce myself proper, seeing as I bought the adjoining property last month." "I know who you are," Adelaide said, her green eyes sharp as flint. "And I know what men like you want from a woman in my position." "The answer is no. Now get off my land before I put a hole in that fancy vest." Owen took a careful step backward, raising his free hand in a gesture of peace. He was a tall man, lean and weathered from years of working cattle drives from Texas to Montana. At 28 years old, he had saved enough money to finally settle down, and the property next to Adelaide Edwards' ranch in Red Cloud, Nebraska, had seemed like a gift from the Almighty himself. 200 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it, and a small but sturdy house that just needed some fixing up. What he had not counted on was the previous owner's widow being the most beautiful and fierce woman he had ever laid eyes on. "I will be going then," Owen said, backing down the porch steps. "But if you ever need anything, madam, I am right next door." Adelaide did not lower the shotgun until he had mounted his bay gelding and ridden out of sight. Only then did she allow herself to take a shaking breath and lean the weapon against the doorframe. Her hands were trembling, and she hated herself for it. She had been trembling too much these past 2 years since Thomas had died, and she was tired of feeling weak. The ranch house felt too quiet as she walked back inside. It was a modest home, built by Thomas when they had first married 5 years ago. Adelaide had been only 19 then, fresh from her father's farm in Missouri, and Thomas Edwards had seemed like everything a girl could want. He was steady, hardworking, and kind. What she had not known was that he had a weak heart, something even he had not fully understood until the day he collapsed in the barn and never got up again. She had been 23 when she became a widow, and now at 25 she had heard every variation of the same conversation from well-meaning neighbors. A woman could not run a ranch alone. She should remarry. She should sell the land. She should move back east where she belonged. Adelaide had no intention of doing any of those things. The next morning, she woke before dawn as always and went about her chores. She had 10 head of cattle, a small herd but manageable for one person. She had chickens, 2 pigs, and a vegetable garden that supplied most of her food. It was not an easy life, but it was hers, and she protected it fiercely. She was mucking out the barn when she heard the sound of hammering coming from the property line. Frowning, she set down her pitchfork and walked toward the noise, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Owen Kincaid was building a fence along the boundary between their properties. He had his shirt sleeves rolled up, and she could see the muscles in his forearms working as he drove posts into the ground. He glanced up as she approached and tipped his hat. "Morning, madam," he called out cheerfully. "What do you think you are doing?" Adelaide demanded. "Building a fence," Owen replied, as if this should be obvious. "I've got cattle coming in next week, and I want to make sure they do not wander onto your land. Figured it would be neighborly." Adelaide crossed her arms. "I do not need your neighborly gestures." "Did not say you did," Owen said mildly. "But I need the fence, so I am building it on my side of the property line. Unless you have got some objection to that." She did not, and they both knew it. Frustrated, Adelaide turned on her heel and marched back to her barn. Behind her, she could hear the steady rhythm of hammering resume. Over the next few weeks, Owen Kincaid proved to be a maddeningly considerate neighbor. When a late spring storm threatened, he rode over to let her know it was coming, in case she needed to secure anything. When one of her cows got through a break in her fence, He herded it back and helped her repair the damage, refusing any payment. When she went into town for supplies, she would return to find small gifts left on her porch: a sack of good coffee beans, a jar of honey, fresh bread still warm from baking. Adelaide wanted to be angry about it, but the truth was, the gifts were always things she genuinely needed. The coffee beans came the week her own supply ran out. The honey arrived when her throat was sore from a spring cold. The bread appeared on a day when she had been too exhausted to bake her own. It was unnerving, this quiet attentiveness. Thomas had been a good husband, but he had not noticed small things like this. He had not anticipated her needs or paid attention to the rhythms of her daily life. Owen Kincaid seemed to observe everything, and she did not know how to feel about that. One evening in early June, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Owen rode up to her house again. This time, Adelaide did not reach for her shotgun. She just stood on the porch with her arms crossed, waiting. "Madam," Owen said, dismounting and approaching with his hat in his hands once more. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of having dinner with me sometime. Nothing fancy, just a meal between neighbors." "No," Adelaide said immediately. Owen nodded as if he had expected this answer. "Fair enough, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind." He rode away without another word, and Adelaide went inside feeling strangely unsettled. She told herself it was relief that he had accepted her refusal so easily, but it felt uncomfortably like disappointment. The summer heat settled over Nebraska in earnest, and Adelaide threw herself into her work with renewed determination. She had promised herself when Thomas died that she would never depend on another man again, and she meant to keep that promise. But the work was harder than she wanted to admit. The cattle needed constant attention, the garden demanded daily care, and the house itself required repairs she did not always have the strength or skill to complete. She was on the roof trying to patch a leak when the ladder slipped. One moment she was hammering down a shingle, and the next she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her. She hit hard, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs and sending a sharp pain shooting through her left ankle. Adelaide lay there for a moment, stunned and gasping, trying to assess the damage. Her ankle was already swelling, and when she tried to stand, white-hot agony shot up her leg. She collapsed back onto the ground with a cry of frustration and pain. That was how Owen found her 20 minutes later. She heard hoofbeats approaching and looked up to see him riding hard across the field, his face tight with concern. "I heard you yell," he said, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "What happened?" "I am fine," Adelaide said through gritted teeth, even though tears of pain were streaming down her face. "Just go away." Owen ignored her completely. He knelt beside her and gently examined her ankle with experienced hands. "It is not broken, but it is a bad sprain. You will not be walking on this for at least a week, maybe 2. "I do not have time to not walk on it," Adelaide said, angry at the weakness in her voice. "I have animals to tend, work to do." "Then I will do it," Owen said simply. He stood and scooped her up in his arms before she could protest. "Put me down," Adelaide demanded, but her voice lacked conviction. The pain in her ankle was overwhelming, and despite her pride, she was grateful not to have to hobble to the house on her own. Owen carried her inside and settled her gently on the sofa. "Where do you keep your medical supplies?" Too exhausted to argue, Adelaide told him. He found the whiskey she kept for emergencies, the clean bandages, and a basin for cool water. With surprising gentleness, he removed her boot, making her wince despite his care, and began wrapping her swollen ankle. "Where did you learn to do this?" Adelaide asked, watching his capable hands work. "Trail drives," Owen replied. You learn basic doctoring when you are weeks away from the nearest town, seen more than my share of broken bones and sprains." When he finished, he straightened and looked at her seriously. "I am going to go tend your animals now. Tomorrow I will come back and do the same. I will keep doing it until you are back on your feet." "I cannot pay you," Adelaide said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I am not asking for payment," Owen said. "I am being a neighbor." "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why do you keep helping me? What do you want from me?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his brown eyes steady on hers. "I want you to be safe and well," he finally said. "That is all, nothing more, nothing less." He left before she could respond, and Adelaide lay on the sofa listening to the sounds of him working outside. She heard him feeding the chickens, talking softly to the pigs, moving the cattle to fresh grazing. Tasks that took her hours seemed to take him half the time, and she realized with a start that it was because he was stronger and more experienced than she was. He had spent years working ranches much larger than hers. This was probably easy for him. That thought should have made her feel better, but instead it filled her with a confusing mixture of gratitude and resentment. She did not want to need his help. She had worked so hard to prove she could manage on her own. Over the next 2 weeks, Owen kept his word. He came every morning before dawn and did not leave until all her chores were completed. He never came inside unless she called for him, never presumed on her hospitality. He just worked, steady and uncomplaining, asking nothing in return. Adelaide spent those 2 weeks watching him through the windows, learning things about him without meaning to. She learned that he sang to the animals while he worked, old trail songs in a surprisingly good baritone. She learned that he was meticulous about repairing things, never leaving a job half done. She learned that he had a gentle hand with frightened creatures, calming her most skittish cow with patience and soft words. Most of all, she learned that Owen Kincaid was nothing like what she had assumed men were like. He did not expect praise or gratitude for his work. He did not try to use her vulnerability to his advantage. He simply showed up, day after day, and did what needed to be done. By the time her ankle healed enough for her to walk on it, Adelaide found herself actually looking forward to his morning arrivals. She started making extra coffee, enough for 2, and leaving a cup out on the porch for him. She began baking bread more often than she needed, wrapping up half a loaf for him to take home. They did not talk much, but a comfortable routine developed. Owen would arrive, drink his coffee, and get to work. Adelaide would sit on the porch and shell peas or mend clothes. And sometimes they would exchange a few words about the weather or the cattle or small matters of ranch life. It was on a morning in late July when Owen finished his work and came to sit on the porch steps, wiping the sweat from his brow. Adelaide had just brought out a pitcher of cool water from the well, and she poured him a glass without being asked. "Your ankle is healing well," Owen observed. "You will be able to manage on your own again soon." "Yes," Adelaide agreed, and was surprised to find she felt more regret than relief at this fact. Owen drank his water slowly, seeming to gather his thoughts. Finally, he set down the glass and turned to look at her. "Madam, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to know you are free to refuse. I will keep being your neighbor either way, and I will help you if you ever need it. But I have to ask, because I think you should know how I feel." Adelaide's heart began to beat faster, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "What is it? Would you consider marrying me?" Owen asked, his voice steady but his eyes showing his nervousness. "I am not talking about a love match or anything fancy. I know you barely know me, and I respect that you are still mourning your husband. But I think we could make a good partnership. I could help you run this ranch, and you would have someone to depend on. We could keep things simple, whatever you need them to be." Adelaide stared at him, 1,000 thoughts rushing through her mind at once. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, because the truth was that Owen Kincaid had already proven himself to be kind, reliable, and hardworking. He had helped her without expectation of reward, and she knew instinctively that he would treat her well. But a larger part of her was still angry at the world, still determined to prove she did not need anyone, still afraid of losing herself again in someone else's life. "No," she heard herself say, and watched something flicker in Owen's eyes, hurt or disappointment. "I am sorry, but no. I have worked too hard to maintain my independence. I cannot give that up, not even for someone like you." Owen nodded slowly and rose to his feet. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for your honesty, madam." He left then, and Adelaide sat alone on the porch as the sun climbed higher in the sky. She told herself she had made the right decision, the only decision she could make. But something ached in her chest, and she could not quite convince herself it was satisfaction. The next morning, Owen did not come. Adelaide had not expected him to, since her ankle was mostly healed and she had refused his proposal. But when she went out to do her chores, she found all the work already done. The animals were fed, the water troughs filled, and a section of fence she had been meaning to repair was freshly mended. He had come and gone before dawn, finishing the work without bothering her. The same thing happened the next morning and the next. Adelaide never saw him, but the evidence of his care was everywhere. Her chicken coop got a new roof. Her garden was weeded. Small repairs around the property were completed overnight as if by magic. On the fourth morning, Adelaide woke even earlier than usual and waited. Sure enough, just as the sky was beginning to lighten, she saw Owen's silhouette moving near the barn. She walked out to meet him, her bare feet wet with dew. "You do not have to keep doing this," she said without preamble. "I said no." Owen looked up from the fence post he was securing. In the dim pre-dawn light, his face was shadowed, but she could see his slight smile. "I know what you said. This is not about the proposal. This is just me being a neighbor." "Neighbors do not do this much for each other," Adelaide protested. "Mine do," Owen said simply. He finished with the post and straightened, picking up his tools. "Your property is too much for one person, Adelaide. You have been running yourself ragged trying to keep up with it all. I have got the time and the ability to help, so I am helping. That is all there is to it." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his soft drawl sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "I do not understand you," she said, frustrated and confused and touched all at once. "I know," Owen said, "but maybe someday you will." He left then, melting back into the shadows of early morning, and Adelaide stood alone in her yard wondering what kind of man kept helping someone who had rejected him. The summer wore on, and the strange routine continued. Owen worked his own property during the day, building his ranch into something impressive and successful. He brought in more cattle, hired a couple of hands to help with the heavy work, and slowly transformed his land into a thriving operation. But every few days, Adelaide would wake to find some task completed on her property, some problem solved before she even knew it existed. And despite her confusion about his motives, she found herself looking forward to the small surprises, the quiet evidence that someone was thinking about her welfare. In late August, a traveling preacher came through Red Cloud, and the whole town turned out for Sunday services. Adelaide went reluctantly, knowing she would face the usual questions and judgments about her situation. She wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that had belonged to her mother, and pinned her dark auburn hair back in a neat bun. Owen was there too, standing near the back of the congregation in his clean shirt and pressed trousers. Their eyes met across the crowd, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Something about that simple gesture, the respect and recognition in it, made her feel less alone. After the service, the town gathered for a potluck dinner. Adelaide had brought a peach pie, and she was setting it on the dessert table when Margaret Crawford approached her. Margaret was the mayor's wife, a woman in her 50s with opinions about everything and no hesitation about sharing them. "Adelaide, dear," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I could not help but notice you have been spending quite a bit of time with that new rancher, Owen Kincaid." "He is my neighbor," Adelaide said evenly, keeping her voice neutral. Of course," Margaret said, waving her hand dismissively. "But people are beginning to talk, dear. A young widow, a single man working so closely together. It does not look proper." Adelaide felt her temper rising, but before she could respond, a warm presence appeared at her elbow. "Mrs. Crawford," Owen said politely, tipping his hat. "I hope you are not troubling Miss Adelaide with gossip. The work I do on her property is nothing more than neighborly assistance, and anyone who suggests otherwise is mistaken." Margaret flushed slightly, caught off guard by the direct challenge. "I am sure it is all perfectly innocent," she said stiffly. "I was merely expressing concern for Adelaide's reputation." "Her reputation is spotless," Owen said firmly. "She is one of the hardest working people in this county, and she deserves respect, not gossip." He offered his arm to Adelaide. "May I get you some lemonade, madam?" Adelaide took his arm, grateful for the escape. They walked away from Margaret's pinched expression and toward the drinks table, and Adelaide found herself fighting back a smile. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," Owen replied. "I will not stand by while someone disrespects you." They stood together in companionable silence, sipping lemonade and watching the town children play. It felt natural, standing beside him like this, and Adelaide realized with a start that she had come to think of Owen as something more than just a neighbor. He had become a friend, someone she trusted and relied on without even meaning to. As the afternoon wore on, other people came up to talk with them, and Adelaide noticed how Owen always included her in the conversation, always deferred to her knowledge about her own ranch. He never tried to speak for her or act as though her opinions mattered less than his. He treated her as an equal, something very few men in her experience had ever done. When the sun began to set and people started heading home, Owen walked Adelaide back to her wagon. He helped her up onto the seat with a steady hand and looked up at her with those serious brown eyes. "Thank you for allowing me to accompany you today," he said. "It was a pleasure." "Thank you for defending me to Margaret Crawford," Adelaide replied. "Though I am sure it will just give her more to gossip about." Owen shrugged. "Let her gossip. The truth is the truth, and people who matter will see it." He stepped back and tipped his hat, and Adelaide drove home feeling lighter than she had in weeks. September brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn. Adelaide's cattle were fat and healthy, ready to be sold at the fall market in Omaha. It would be her first time taking them to market alone, and she was nervous about the trip. Thomas had always handled the selling, and she was not sure she could get a fair price on her own. She was worrying over this problem one evening when she heard a horse approaching. She looked out to see Owen riding up, and she stepped onto the porch to greet him. "Evening, madam," he said, dismounting. "I wanted to talk to you about the market in Omaha." Adelaide's defenses immediately went up. "I can handle it myself," she said quickly. "I know you can," Owen said patiently, "but I am taking my cattle there too, and I thought we might travel together. It is a long journey and there is safety in numbers. Plus, if we combine our herds for the trip, we can share the costs of hiring drovers." Adelaide hesitated. What he said made sense, but she was wary of appearing weak or dependent. "I do not need charity," she said. "It is not charity," Owen said. "It is good business. I will benefit from having your cattle added to mine. Makes both our herds look more impressive to buyers." She studied his face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but found only honest practicality. Finally, she nodded. "All right. That makes sense. When do we leave?" "Monday morning, if that suits you." They spent the next few days preparing for the journey. Owen hired 2 experienced drovers to help manage the combined herd of about 40 head. Adelaide packed supplies and closed up her house, making sure everything was secure in her absence. The journey to Omaha took 4 days. They drove the cattle hard but not too hard, moving them about 10 miles a day and camping at night wherever they could find good grazing and water. Adelaide had been on trail drives before, when Thomas was alive, but this felt different. She was responsible for her own animals now, making her own decisions. Owen treated her as a full partner in the enterprise. When they discussed where to stop for the night or which route to take, he asked for her opinion and listened to her answers. When they reached the stockyards in Omaha, he introduced her to buyers as a fellow rancher, not as someone's widow who needed looking after. The first buyer they met tried to lowball them, offering a price well below market value. Adelaide recognized it immediately and started to negotiate, but the man dismissed her with barely a glance and turned to Owen. "Your wife does not understand cattle prices," the man said condescendingly. "Why do not you and I discuss this like businessmen?" "She is not my wife, she is my business partner," Owen said coolly. "And she understands prices just fine. In fact, her cattle are better quality than mine, so if you cannot see that, maybe we should take our business elsewhere." They walked away from that buyer and found another, a fair-minded man who recognized good animals when he saw them. Adelaide negotiated a strong price for her cattle, and when the sale was complete, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she had experienced before. She had done this herself, on her own merits, and succeeded. That night, they stayed at a boarding house in Omaha. Owen had booked separate rooms, of course, and they ate dinner in the common dining room with the other guests. After the meal, they sat on the front porch watching the city lights, which were far brighter than anything they had in Red Cloud. "You did well today," Owen said. "That buyer tried to cheat you, but you stood your ground." "I learned from watching Thomas," Adelaide said. "And I have been studying prices in the newspaper. I knew what my cattle were worth." "You knew more than that," Owen said. "You knew your own worth. That is harder to learn." Adelaide looked at him in the dim lamplight, this man who had shown her nothing but respect and patience. "Why do you do this?" she asked softly. "Why do you keep helping me, keep treating me like an equal when so few other men would?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My mother was widowed when I was 12, he finally said. "My father died in a ranch accident, and suddenly she was alone with 3 children and a failing property. The men in our town treated her like she was helpless, like she could not possibly understand how to run a business or make decisions. They tried to buy her land for pennies, tried to push her into marrying men who just wanted her property." He paused, his jaw tight with old anger. "But my mother was smart and strong. She kept that ranch running, raised us 3 kids, and built a successful business. She taught me that women are just as capable as men, maybe more so, because they have to work twice as hard to get half the credit. So when I see a woman like you, Adelaide, working yourself to exhaustion to prove what you should not have to prove, I want to help. Not because I think you are weak, but because I know you are strong and you deserve support." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever talked to her like this before, had ever truly seen her struggles and validated them. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the sounds of the city, and Adelaide felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this kind and patient man, had been trying to show her something all summer, and she was only just beginning to understand what it was. They returned to Red Cloud 3 days later, both richer from the sale of their cattle and tired from the long journey. Owen helped Adelaide get her animals settled back on her property, and as he was preparing to leave, she stopped him. "Owen," she said, his name feeling natural on her tongue now. "Would you like to stay for dinner? It is the least I can do after everything you have done for me." He smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face. "I would like that very much." Adelaide cooked a simple meal of fried chicken, potatoes, and greens from her garden. They ate at her small kitchen table, and the conversation flowed easily. Owen told her about growing up in Kansas, about his years on the trail drives, about his dreams for his ranch. Adelaide found herself opening up too, telling him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had both passed from influenza, about her dreams of building something lasting and meaningful. When the meal was finished and the dishes were washed, Owen stood to leave. At the door, he turned to her with that serious look in his eyes again. "Adelaide," he said carefully, "I know I asked you this once before and you said no, but I have to ask again because my feelings have not changed. Would you consider marrying me? Not because you need me, but because we are good together, because we work well as partners, because I think we could build something fine if we combined our lives and our land." Adelaide looked at him, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, who had helped her without asking for anything in return, who had seen her as a full human being when so many others saw only a woman in need of rescue. And she realized something that took her breath away. She wanted to say yes, not because she needed saving, not because she was lonely or scared or unable to cope on her own, but because Owen Kincaid was a good man and being with him would not diminish her, it would enhance her life. But fear still held her tongue. Fear of losing herself again, fear of depending on someone who might leave her like Thomas had, fear of opening her heart to the possibility of that kind of pain again. "I cannot," she said, and watched his face fall. "I am sorry, Owen, I just cannot." He nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for dinner, Adelaide. It was wonderful." He left, and Adelaide stood alone in her kitchen, wondering why doing the right thing felt so much like making a terrible mistake. The weeks that followed were harder than Adelaide expected. Owen did not stop being her neighbor or her friend, but something had changed between them. There was a distance now, a careful politeness that hurt more than anger would have. He still helped with occasional tasks on her property, but he no longer showed up unannounced. He waited to be asked, and Adelaide found she missed the easy familiarity they had built over the summer. October brought the first frost, and with it, preparations for winter. Adelaide worked from dawn to dusk, cutting and storing hay, reinforcing her barn against the coming cold, putting up the last of her garden vegetables. It was exhausting work, and she found herself wishing more than once that Owen was there to help, not because she could not do it alone, but because it was more pleasant with company. She saw him at church on Sundays, and they exchanged polite greetings, but nothing more. He sat on the opposite side of the congregation now, and Adelaide felt the absence of his presence like a physical ache. It was Margaret Crawford, ironically, who finally made Adelaide see sense. The older woman cornered her after services one Sunday in late October, her expression full of false concern. "My dear Adelaide," Margaret said, "I heard that Owen Kincaid proposed to you and you refused him. Is that true?" Adelaide bristled at the invasion of privacy but kept her voice level. "That is between Owen and myself, Mrs. Crawford. Of course, Margaret said, clearly unbothered by the rebuke. It is just that I heard he has been corresponding with a widow from Lincoln. Apparently they met at the cattle market and she has been writing to him. Some people say they might marry in the spring. Adelaide felt like she had been punched in the stomach. The thought of Owen with someone else, building the life he had offered to build with her, made her feel sick with regret and loss. "I hope he will be very happy," she managed to say, though the words tasted like ashes. She left the church quickly and drove home in a daze. Back at her ranch, she sat on the porch and forced herself to face the truth she had been avoiding all these months. She loved Owen Kincaid. Not because she needed him, not because he had helped her or protected her or made her life easier. She loved him because he was kind and patient and good, because he made her laugh, because he challenged her to be better while accepting her exactly as she was. Because when she imagined the rest of her life, he was in every picture, and without him, those pictures felt empty and cold. She had been so focused on protecting her independence that she had failed to see the most important truth. Loving someone and depending on someone were not the same thing. She could love Owen and still be her own person. She could build a life with him that was a partnership, not a surrender, but she had refused him twice now, and according to Margaret Crawford, he had moved on. She had lost her chance. Adelaide sat on that porch until the sun set and the stars came out, and then she made a decision. She could not bear the thought of Owen marrying someone else without at least telling him how she felt. Even if he rejected her, even if it was too late, she had to try. The next morning, she rode over to Owen's ranch. She had not been to his property since he first bought it, and she was amazed by the transformation. He had built a fine barn, repaired the house, and laid out well-organized corrals and pastures. It was the work of someone who intended to stay, to build a lasting legacy. She found him working in the barn, and when he looked up and saw her, surprise crossed his face. "Adelaide," he said, setting down the harness he had been mending. "Is everything all right? Do you need help with something?" "Yes," Adelaide said, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I need help with something very important." She dismounted and walked toward him, her hands shaking. "I heard a rumor in town," she said, "about you and a widow from Lincoln." Owen's expression became guarded. "Margaret Crawford has a big mouth." "Is it true?" Adelaide asked. "Are you going to marry her?" "I have received letters from her," Owen said carefully. "She seems like a nice woman. We have talked about the possibility of a future together. Do you love her?" The question burst out before Adelaide could stop it. Owen looked at her for a long moment, and something painful flickered in his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "But I am tired of being alone, Adelaide. I am tired of loving someone who does not want me back." "But I do," Adelaide said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I do want you back. I love you, Owen. I think I have loved you since the summer, but I was too scared and too stubborn to see it. I was so focused on proving I did not need anyone that I forgot to pay attention to what I actually wanted. And what I want is you." Owen stared at her, hope and disbelief warring on his face. "Adelaide," he said hoarsely, "you have refused me twice. Why should I believe you mean it this time?" "Because I am not saying yes because I need you," Adelaide said, stepping closer. "I am saying yes because I want you, because you make my life better, because I think we could build something wonderful together, not because either of us is incomplete alone, but because we are better as a team. I was afraid before, afraid of losing myself like I did in my first marriage. But Thomas and I, we were just children playing at being adults. You and I, we are equals. We can build a real partnership, the kind where we both grow stronger, not weaker." She took a shaking breath. "So I am asking you now, Owen Kincaid, will you marry me?" For a moment, Owen just stood there, frozen. Then a slow smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile Adelaide had ever seen. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and swept her into his arms. "Yes," he said, laughing. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Thomas. This was fire and passion and coming home all at once. Adelaide wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and regret and hope into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the day you pointed that shotgun at me and told me to get off your land. You were the most magnificent thing I had ever seen." Adelaide laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I must have been terrifying." "You were," Owen agreed. "You still are, but that is one of the many reasons I love you." They stood there in the barn, holding each other as golden October sunlight streamed through the doors, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in years, complete and utter peace. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Red Cloud. Adelaide wore a new dress of emerald green that brought out the color of her eyes, and Owen wore his best suit, looking handsomer than she had ever seen him. The whole town turned out for the wedding, even Margaret Crawford, who sniffed disapprovingly but could not hide her curiosity. The preacher who had come through in August had moved on, so the ceremony was performed by Judge Henderson, who served as both magistrate and occasional officiant for Red Cloud. He kept the service short and practical, which suited both Adelaide and Owen just fine. "Do you, Owen Kincaid, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Owen said, his eyes never leaving Adelaide's face. "And do you, Adelaide Edwards, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Adelaide said, her voice strong and clear. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Nebraska, I pronounce you husband and wife. Owen, you may kiss your bride." Owen cupped Adelaide's face in his hands and kissed her gently, and the small congregation erupted in applause. When they turned to face their neighbors as a married couple, Adelaide felt a surge of joy and rightness that took her breath away. The town had organized a reception in the church hall, and Adelaide was touched by the genuine warmth she received. Women she had thought looked down on her came up to congratulate her and welcome her into the community of married women. Men who had dismissed her as an incapable widow now treated her with respect, though Adelaide suspected that had more to do with Owen's reputation than any change in their actual opinions. Still, she was willing to accept their good wishes graciously. This was a new beginning, and she intended to meet it with optimism and hope. Owen had arranged for his 2 ranch hands to manage both properties for a few days, so he and Adelaide could have a brief honeymoon. They spent 3 days at Owen's ranch, which was larger and more comfortable than Adelaide's house, making plans for their future. "We should combine the herds," Owen said one evening as they sat together on his porch, watching the sunset. Adelaide was nestled against his side, marveling at how natural it felt to be close to him like this. "Your land and mine together make nearly 500 acres. That is enough to run a serious cattle operation." "We could do more than cattle," Adelaide said thoughtfully. "I have been reading about crop rotation and soil management. If we dedicate some land to growing hay and feed, we could be more self-sufficient." "I like that," Owen said. "What about your house? Do you want to keep it or sell it?" Adelaide considered this. Her house held memories of Thomas, both good and painful, but it also represented her hard-won independence. She was not sure she was ready to let it go. "Could we keep it?" she asked. "Maybe use it for the ranch hands or as a guest house." "Of course," Owen said immediately. "Whatever you want, Adelaide. This is your ranch as much as mine now. We make these decisions together." Together. The word sent warmth flooding through her chest. She had been alone for so long, carrying every burden by herself, that the idea of sharing responsibility felt both strange and wonderful. That night, in Owen's bed, Adelaide discovered the other side of marriage that she had never truly experienced with Thomas. Owen was patient and gentle, but there was a passion between them that she had not known was possible. He touched her like she was precious, like every part of her mattered, and she responded with an abandon that surprised them both. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Owen traced patterns on her bare shoulder and spoke softly. "I meant what I said in my vows," he murmured. "For better or worse, Adelaide, I know life is not always easy. There will be hard times ahead, bad years, struggles we cannot predict. But I promise you, I will never stop showing up. I will never stop choosing you every single day." Adelaide turned to face him, her eyes adjusting to the dim moonlight filtering through the window. "I promise the same," she said. "I am sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. But I see it now, and I am not letting go." They sealed that promise with another kiss, and Adelaide fell asleep feeling safer and more loved than she had ever thought possible. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. They combined their operations, running cattle on the expanded range and planting hay and wheat on the most fertile bottomland. Owen taught Adelaide things he had learned on trail drives, techniques for managing large herds and identifying sick animals early. Adelaide taught Owen about gardening and food preservation, skills his mother had taught him, but that he had let lapse during his bachelor years. They fell into an easy partnership, each contributing their strengths and supporting the other's weaknesses. When Adelaide struggled with the heavy physical labor of haying season, Owen picked up the slack without complaint. When Owen got frustrated with the paperwork and accounting that came with running a business, Adelaide took over the books and managed their finances with a skill that impressed them both. By their first anniversary, the Kincaid Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the county. They had tripled their cattle herd, harvested a bumper crop of wheat, and paid off the last of Owen's debts from purchasing his original property. To celebrate, Owen took Adelaide to Lincoln for a week. It was Adelaide's first time in a real city, and she was overwhelmed by the size and bustle of it all. They stayed in a proper hotel, ate in restaurants, and visited shops full of goods she had only seen in catalogs. But the best part of the trip was simply being together, away from the constant demands of the ranch. They walked through the city parks hand in hand, talking about their dreams for the future. They attended a theatrical performance, and Adelaide laughed until she cried at the comedy. They made love in their hotel room with an intensity born of a year of deep affection and growing passion. On their last night in Lincoln, as they prepared for bed, Owen pulled out a small velvet box. "I never gave you a proper engagement ring," he said, looking almost shy. "I want to remedy that." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect emerald. "It reminded me of your eyes," he said, "and of the dress you wore when we got married." Adelaide slipped the ring on her finger, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Owen, you did not have to do this." "I wanted to," he said. "I want you to have beautiful things, Adelaide. You work so hard and you deserve to be celebrated." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into that kiss, and they celebrated their anniversary properly, wrapped up in each other and the life they were building together. They returned to Red Cloud to find that Adelaide was pregnant. She had suspected it before they left for Lincoln, but she wanted to be sure before she told Owen. The doctor in Lincoln confirmed what she already knew. She was about 3 months along, due in early spring. Owen's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down and fussed over whether he had been too rough, whether she needed to rest, whether she was feeling well. "Owen," Adelaide said, laughing, "I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "I know," Owen said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture she recognized as nervousness. "But you are my wife, and that is my child, and I want to make sure you are both safe and healthy." His protectiveness was endearing, even when it occasionally crossed into being overprotective. Adelaide had to firmly tell him more than once that she was perfectly capable of doing her normal work, at least for the first several months. But she appreciated that his concern came from love, and she tried to be patient with his worry. As winter settled in, and Adelaide's pregnancy became visible, the women of Red Cloud welcomed her into a circle she had not been part of before. They shared advice about childbirth, gave her baby clothes their own children had outgrown, and taught her how to prepare for the enormous change that was coming. Margaret Crawford, surprisingly, was one of the most helpful. It turned out the older woman had lost 3 children in infancy before finally raising 2 to adulthood, and her brusque manner hid a deep well of practical knowledge. "Do not let the men coddle you too much," Margaret advised one afternoon when Adelaide was visiting the general store. "You need to stay strong and active right up until the end. Makes the birth easier." Adelaide took the advice to heart, continuing to work on the ranch throughout her pregnancy, though she let Owen take over the heaviest tasks. She found she enjoyed the changing rhythm of her body, the way her hands moved instinctively to protect the growing swell of her belly, the sensation of the baby moving inside her. Owen was fascinated by the pregnancy, resting his hands on her stomach every night and talking softly to the child within. He read aloud from books while Adelaide sewed tiny clothes, and they spent long winter evenings discussing names and making plans for the nursery. "If it is a boy, I want to name him after my father," Owen said one night. "Henry Kincaid. Does that sound all right to you?" "I like it," Adelaide said. "And if it is a girl, you should choose," Owen said. "What was your mother's name?" "Rose," Adelaide said softly. "Rose Margaret. Though I suppose we should not use Margaret, given our neighbor." They both laughed at that, and Owen kissed her temple. "Rose Kincaid sounds perfect." The baby was born on a surprisingly warm day in April, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. Adelaide woke at dawn with pains in her back, and by noon, the contractions were coming fast and strong. Owen wanted to ride for the doctor, but Margaret Crawford, who had come to check on Adelaide, told him firmly that there was no time. She had delivered dozens of babies, and she could see that this one was coming quickly. Owen paced outside the bedroom door, listening to Adelaide's cries with a fear and helplessness he had never experienced on the worst trail drive or in the most dangerous storm. When the baby finally arrived and he heard the thin wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. Margaret opened the door, her sleeves rolled up and a satisfied smile on her face. "You have a son," she announced, "and your wife is just fine. Come meet your boy." Owen entered the room to find Adelaide propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny red-faced infant, wrapped in a blanket and making little mewling sounds. "Owen," Adelaide said softly, "come meet Henry." Owen approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son. The baby had a fuzz of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, and Owen felt his heart crack open with a love so fierce it brought tears to his eyes. "He is perfect," Owen whispered. "Adelaide, he is perfect. You are amazing. I cannot believe you just did that." "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time," Adelaide repeated with a tired smile, but her eyes shone with pride. Owen sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around both his wife and his son. And for a long moment, they just stayed there, marveling at the miracle of new life. Henry Kincaid was a healthy, hungry baby who kept his parents up at all hours with his demands for food and attention. Adelaide threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning quickly and adapting to the new rhythms of life with an infant. Owen was a devoted father, walking the floor with Henry when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and insisting on taking the baby for long stretches so Adelaide could rest. Watching him with their son made Adelaide fall in love with him all over again. That summer, they hired more help for the ranch so they could focus on caring for Henry. Owen brought on a young married couple, Daniel and Emma Morrison, who were struggling to make a start in the territory. They moved into Adelaide's old house, and Daniel became Owen's right-hand man, while Emma helped Adelaide with the housework and baby care. The arrangement worked beautifully. Adelaide found she enjoyed having another woman around, someone to talk to and share the work with. Emma was only 20, bright and eager to learn, and she adored baby Henry. The two women became fast friends, and Adelaide realized how lonely she had been during her years as a widow. As Henry grew, the Kincaid Ranch continued to prosper. They had good years and bad years, as all ranchers did. There was the drought summer when they lost a quarter of their herd and had to borrow money to make it through. There was the winter when a blizzard destroyed their barn and killed half their cattle, and they had to rebuild from almost nothing. But through every hardship, Owen and Adelaide faced it together. They never gave up, never stopped believing in each other or their dream. And slowly, steadily, they built something that lasted. When Henry was 3 years old, Adelaide became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy felt easier even though she was chasing after a rambunctious toddler. Their second child was born in the autumn, another boy they named Thomas, after Adelaide's first husband. Owen had suggested the name, saying it was important to honor the man who had first brought Adelaide to Nebraska. Adelaide cried when he said it, touched by his generosity and understanding. Thomas would always be a part of her history, but Owen had never been threatened by that. He had given her the space to remember her past while building a future with him. Thomas was a quieter baby than Henry, more content to observe the world than to holler his demands at it. The two boys were different in temperament, but close from the beginning, and watching them grow together filled Adelaide and Owen with deep satisfaction. 2 years after Thomas was born, Adelaide gave birth to their only daughter, whom they named Rose, as they had discussed so long ago. Rose had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and she was fierce from the moment she drew breath. Owen often joked that Rose would end up running the ranch someday, because she had inherited Adelaide's stubborn determination and his own love of the land. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time Henry was 10, the Kincaid spread was one of the largest and most successful in the county. They ran nearly 300 head of cattle, employed a staff of 5 full-time hands, and had diversified into horses as well, breeding strong working stock that was in high demand throughout Nebraska. Adelaide managed the business side of the operation, keeping meticulous books and handling all their dealings with banks and buyers. Owen managed the day-to-day ranch operations, working alongside his men and teaching his sons the skills they would need to eventually take over. They were partners in every sense of the word, each bringing essential skills to their shared enterprise. People in Red Cloud spoke of the Kincaids with respect and even a touch of awe. Adelaide had gone from being dismissed as a helpless widow to being recognized as one of the sharpest business minds in the territory. One evening when Adelaide was in her late 30s, she and Owen sat together on the porch of their house watching the sunset. The children were inside doing their homework under Emma's supervision, and for once, they had a moment of peace. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly. "Saying no to me those first 2 times. If you had said yes right away, think of all the time we could have had together." Adelaide considered the question seriously. "No," she finally said. "I do not regret it. I needed that time to figure out who I was on my own. If I had said yes right away, I would always have wondered if I could have made it without you. And I think maybe you needed that time too, to prove that you meant what you said about helping me without expectation of reward." She took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "We got together exactly when we were supposed to, and look at what we have built." Owen raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are right," he said, "as usual." "I am not always right," Adelaide protested, laughing. "No," Owen agreed with a grin, "but you are right more often than not, one of the many reasons I love you." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, comfortable in the silence that came from years of deep companionship. Adelaide thought about the terrified widow she had been, pointing a shotgun at a stranger on her porch. She thought about all the times she had said no, protecting her independence with fierce determination. And she thought about Owen, who had simply kept showing up, day after day, proving through his actions that love did not have to mean surrender. That partnership could be about 2 strong people choosing to be stronger together. "Thank you," Adelaide said softly. "For what?" Owen asked. "For being patient with me, for showing up even when I pushed you away, for seeing me as I really was and loving me anyway." Owen pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder. "Always," he said. "I will always show up for you, Adelaide. That was my promise and I meant it." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, they sat together on that porch, surrounded by the land they had built and the family they had created, and knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love that was chosen freely, honored daily, and built to last through whatever storms might come. A partnership of equals who had learned that independence and love were not opposites, but rather 2 parts of the same beautiful whole. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. They lost Daniel Morrison to a riding accident when he was only 30, and grieved alongside Emma and their 4 children. They celebrated when Henry married a smart young woman from Lincoln and brought her home to the ranch. They watched Thomas go off to university in Omaha, determined to study law and make his mark in a different way than his parents had. And through it all, through every triumph and tragedy, Adelaide and Owen faced it together. They grew older, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and long years, but the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper and richer with time, like good soil that produced better crops with each passing season. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together everyone from Red Cloud and beyond. The celebration was held in the big barn on the ranch, which had been decorated with ribbons and lanterns. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. As Adelaide looked around at the crowd, She was struck by how much had changed. Margaret Crawford was there, now an old woman but still sharp-tongued and interfering in the kindest way. Emma Morrison was there with her grown children. The men who had once dismissed Adelaide as an incapable widow now sought her advice on business matters. Owen pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor and they moved together to a slow waltz. Adelaide rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Owen murmured into her hair. "Not since this morning," Adelaide replied, smiling. "Well, I do," Owen said. "More than ever. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide Kincaid." "And you kept showing up," Adelaide said softly, echoing the thought that had been with her since those early days. "You just kept showing up until I finally had the sense to let you in." "Best decision you ever made," Owen said with a grin. "Second best," Adelaide corrected. "The best decision was asking you to marry me that day in your barn, taking control of my own destiny, choosing you because I wanted to, not because I had to." Owen laughed and spun her around, and Adelaide felt young again, full of the same fire and determination that had carried her through her hardest days. But now, that fire was tempered by love and experience, and the deep contentment that came from a life well lived. The party went late into the night, and when it was finally over and the guests had gone home, Adelaide and Owen walked back to their house hand in hand. The moon was full and bright, casting silver shadows across the ranch they had built together. 25 years, Adelaide said wonderingly. "Has it really been that long?" "Not nearly long enough," Owen said. "I am planning on at least 25 more." "Is that so?" Adelaide asked, amused. "Well, I suppose if you insist on sticking around, I will just have to put up with you." Owen stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious despite the lightness of their banter. "I meant what I said that night long ago, Adelaide. I will never stop showing up. I will never stop choosing you. Every day for the rest of my life, I choose you." Adelaide reached up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "And I choose you," she said. "Now and always. You are my partner, my love, my home." They kissed there in the moonlight, two people who had found each other against the odds and built something beautiful together. And as they walked into their house, into the life they had created, Adelaide sent up a silent prayer of gratitude, for second chances, for patient love, for a man who had kept showing up until she was ready to open her heart. And most of all, for the courage to say yes, not because she needed saving, but because she had found someone worth sharing her strength with. The ranch continued to thrive under their management for many more years. Henry took over most of the day-to-day operations as Owen and Adelaide grew older, bringing his wife Sarah's practical wisdom and his own solid judgment to the work. Thomas returned from law school and set up practice in Lincoln, but he visited often, always making time for his parents and the land that had shaped him. Rose, true to Owen's prediction, showed the most interest in actually running the ranch. She worked alongside her father and brother, learning every aspect of the business with fierce dedication. When she was 22, she married a young rancher from the neighboring county, and together they expanded the Kincaid holdings even further. Owen and Adelaide moved into a smaller house on the property, content to let the next generation take the reins while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. But rest did not mean inactivity. Adelaide still kept the books and advised Henry on business decisions. Owen still spent his mornings riding the range, checking on cattle and mending fences. They were in their 60s now, both still healthy and active but slowing down in ways they could not ignore. Adelaide's hands ached with arthritis on cold mornings. Owen's knees protested the long hours in the saddle. But they adapted, finding new ways to be useful and new pleasures in the quieter rhythm of their days. They spent their evenings on the porch, just as they always had, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. They told stories to their grandchildren, passing down the history of the ranch and the values that had sustained them through hard times. They read together, talked together, simply existed together in the companionable silence of two people who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. One spring evening when Adelaide was 68 and Owen 70, they sat together watching a storm roll in across the prairie. The sky was magnificent. Purple and black clouds shot through with lightning, and the air smelled of rain and electricity. "I have been thinking," Owen said thoughtfully, "about that first day when you pointed your shotgun at me." Adelaide laughed. "That was a long time ago." 40 years this summer," Owen said. 40 years since I first knocked on your door and you threatened to shoot me." "I was terrified," Adelaide admitted. "Of you, of the future, of everything. I had worked so hard to convince myself I did not need anyone." "And now?" Owen asked. Adelaide took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and strength in his grip. "Now I know the truth. I did not need you, Owen. I wanted you. There is a world of difference between those two things. Need is about survival. Want is about choice. And every day for the past 40 years, I have chosen you. Even when I am stubborn and set in my ways." Owen asked with a smile. "Especially then," Adelaide said. "Because I am stubborn and set in my ways too, and we balance each other out." The rain began to fall, fat drops that quickly became a downpour. They stayed on the porch, protected by the overhang, watching the water turn the dusty yard to mud and wash the world clean. "I am grateful," Owen said quietly, "for every moment, even the hard ones, for the life we built together, for our children and grandchildren, but most of all for you, Adelaide, for your strength and your courage and your willingness to take a chance on a cowboy who just kept showing up." Adelaide leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat that way until the storm passed, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, painting the wet world in shades of gold. They had many more years together, years filled with the joy of watching their family grow and thrive. Years of quiet contentment and deep companionship. Years of still choosing each other, every single day. When Owen finally passed away at the age of 79, Adelaide grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had known loss before, but this was different. She had lost Thomas when she was still young, when her life was just beginning. Losing Owen felt like losing a part of herself, but it was the kind of pain that came from having loved well and truly. She lived another 5 years after Owen's death, staying active and engaged with the ranch and her family. She saw Rose take over as the primary manager of the Kincaid operation, running it with a skill that made Adelaide proud. She saw her grandchildren grow into adults, starting families of their own. She saw the ranch continue to prosper, a lasting legacy of what she and Owen had built together. On a warm afternoon in late September, Adelaide sat on the porch of the main ranch house, which had long since been expanded and renovated by Henry and Sarah. She was 84 years old, and she could feel her strength fading, but she was not afraid. She had lived a full life, rich with love and purpose. Rose came to sit beside her, taking her hand gently. "How are you feeling, Mama?" "Tired," Adelaide admitted, "but content, so very content." "Tell me again," Rose said, "about how you and Papa met. I never get tired of that story." Adelaide smiled and began the tale she had told so many times over the years. About the widow who refused a good man's proposal 3 times because she was too stubborn and scared to see what was right in front of her. About the cowboy who simply kept showing up, proving through his actions that love did not have to mean surrender. about how they had built something lasting and beautiful together, a partnership of equals who chose each other freely every single day. As she talked, surrounded by the land they had tamed and the family they had raised, Adelaide felt a deep peace settle over her. She had lived well. She had loved well. And when her time came, as it would soon, she would go knowing that her life had mattered. That evening, Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. The whole town of Red Cloud turned out for her funeral, mourning the loss of a woman who had been a pillar of their community for over 50 years. They buried her next to Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a spreading oak tree that they had planted together on their 10th wedding anniversary. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line. They chose each other, every day. The Kincaid Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Rose's line, a testament to what two determined people could build when they combined their strengths. And the story of Adelaide and Owen became a family legend, told and retold to new generations as an example of what real love looked like. Not the easy, romantic love of fairy tales, but the hard one, deeply chosen love of two equals who saw each other clearly and decided to walk through life together. The love of a widow who learned that independence and partnership were not opposites. The love of a cowboy who understood that the best things in life were worth waiting for and working for. The love that endured because one person simply kept showing up, and another person finally found the courage to open her heart. And in the end, that made all the difference.